A long time ago in Ireland, King Connachar of Ulster stood on a raised podium in the great hall of his palace. The day was over and it was now twilight, the beginning of Samhain. More than 1,000 people gathered in the king's hall, and the uproar was joyous as the king's servants prepared for the first night of the feast. Poets sang, women danced, and the king's knights, the Knights of the Red Branch, laid down their arms and told stories of noble adventures. Despite the merriment, Cathbad the Druid stood alone in the stone archway window, staring afar into the other world. Perhaps only Malcolm, the king's harper, was at peace, for his wife, Elva, was with child. They sat together on a pile of woven blankets in a darkened corner of the great hall and talked in gentle whispers. King Connachar raised his wine horn in a grand gesture. He was about to speak when a cry arose that pierced the air. Fear spread through the people, and silence, such as a seashell gives the ear, dropped across the room. A few knights drew their weapons and prepared to defend the king. "Do not stir," commanded the king. "Take not one step until the cause of that noise be known." Cathbad stepped forward into the great hall and raised his staff. He removed the hood from his cloak, and his silver hair reflected the candlelight. His face, wrinkled as a winter apple, looked up slowly, and he said to the king, "I have been observing the clouds, the age of the moon, and the posture of the stars this week." He walked to where Elva lay, for it had been discovered that it was the child of her womb that had cried out. He placed his hands over Elva's stomach and spoke of the child's future. "This is no common child. She is a child of great beauty, and her name shall be Deirdre, and from her beauty will arise a sharp sword to split the tree of Ulster. Kings will seek to marry her, and this will lead to disaster. The Red Branch will divide itself, and there will be warfare because of her." Having spoken, he retired again to his contemplation of the skies. "Kill the child!" cried one of the knights. "Is the life of one child worth the destruction of many? What say you, King Connachar?" The king knew the Druid's prophecies to be accurate, but his curiosity about such extraordinary beauty overcame him. He spoke calmly to the people. "It is not good for Elva to see her child die before it is born, and I must not bring pain to the hearts of my guests." Many people stirred and murmured to one another, not persuaded. Connachar raised his left hand for silence. "This child will be born," he continued. "I will have her raised in a secluded place, and I will marry her myself when she is grown. As my charge, and then as my wife, she will be unable to cause harm. In this way, I will defeat the prophecy." In 2 weeks' time, the child Deirdre was born. Before she was a year old, the king built a thatched house of stone upon the knoll of a distant hill. A fine orchard was planted around the hut and enclosed by a circular wall of field stones. Deirdre was to live there as the sole charge of Levarcham, the king's storyteller, who, now a young woman, had been raised in King Connachar's household. The king trusted her beyond any other. "Guard my treasure," he told Levarcham, "and you shall see your reward." Deirdre was raised among the great hunting lands. Levarcham taught Deirdre all she knew about herbs, flowers, trees and skies, and how to play the harp and sing. Daily she grew more patient and kind, honest and fair. Her hair was crimson, and her body was honey-coloured like a golden orchid. Only her cheeks and lips and fingertips were coloured by faint carmine. To gaze upon her was to find one's gaze slipping, grasping for a hold on some part of her that was not in balance with the remainder. She fired the imagination with a look or gesture which gave meanings to common things. Let her kneel and stroke the head of a fine hunting dog, and you felt that there was goodness in all animals. Her heart grew strong and revealed its quality in her body. One day in the autumn of her 15th year, Levarcham told Deirdre that she was to marry the king the following year. It saddened her, and she grew despondent. When Levarcham saw her distress, she said, "But you shall marry the king. This is to be the honour of your life." Deirdre merely sighed and refused to eat. One morning, Deirdre sat by the window looking out at an early snowfall. A congress of ravens suddenly descended upon the orchard, and one landed on the snow to peck at a beautiful apple that had recently fallen. "Why, that bird," said Deirdre, "is like the man I saw in my dream last night. His hair was dark like the ravens, his skin fair as the snow, and his cheeks as red as that apple. He is the man I shall marry." But Levarcham called her away from the window. The winter months that followed were grey and tremulous. Lowered skies released mists of snow upon the hut. Finally spring came, and one day Deirdre was out collecting wood for the stove when she heard a light singing voice. 3 hunters were upon a path along the northern edge of the royal forest. Deirdre found their song enchanting, but the hunters took no notice of her. As they passed, her attention fell to the tallest hunter. He entered the forest as the other 2 travelled on. "He is the man of my vision," she said incredulously. Deirdre could not contain herself and hurriedly gathered her skirts to follow after him. Deirdre found the hunter in a wide clearing in the forest. He was a young knight of the Red Branch, with grey, certain eyes. The canopy of tall oaks spread overhead, the branches reaching together but not quite touching. Deirdre was compelled by a force she had never known before. She went near to him. From the corner of her eye, she saw the sunbeams of light streaming downward, though they seemed to her to shoot from the earth towards the sky. Her heart throbbed in her chest as she drew her face to his own. She waited a moment, then she gently kissed him. Stepping away, Deirdre quietly spoke this speech. "I saw you in a vision. I will run away with you and love you forever. My kiss is against the king's rule, and I have come away from my mistress without permission. At the new moon they will take me to his palace to be his wife. You must take me away from here." The hunter looked at her and he spoke. "I am Nish, the eldest of the sons of Uisnach." He had never seen such beauty. As he spoke, he trembled, for he realised who he now held in his arms. "Do you not remember the Druid's prophecy? There is still time for you to return." "I value this one moment more than 10 lifetimes with Connacher." Deirdre looked into Nish's eyes, and he there decided. He gave her his love. They ran together to find Nish's brothers, Alan and Arden, who welcomed Deirdre but feared for their brother's safety. They together decided to leave that night, so they gathered provisions and left in a hurry, going into exile by sea to Alba, that is, Scotland. Nish, Deirdre, Alan and Arden settled at the head of Loch Etive. They built a home of red clay at the top of a waterfall and called the home Grannion Deirdre, which means Deirdre's sunny home. The mountain people of Argyll welcomed the great warriors. Nish caught the river's salmon and the deer of the glen, and Deirdre thought that none could be so content as they. For many moons they lived happily. The months became years, and time moved slowly and beautifully, slower than a candle burns, slower indeed than a memory fades. Back in Ireland, King Connachar had, through force of arms, destroyed or made peace with his enemies and established his right to rule. His land was prosperous, but he had become restless. He went to see Cathbad the Druid on an evening 2 years after the exile of Nish. Cathbad listened in silence, for he knew what weighed upon the king. King Connachar spoke of it this way: "Our greatest people, the three torches of the Gael, Nish, Allen and Arden, are not amongst us. It is unfit that they be in exile on account of a woman only. I am going to send Fergus MacCree to Alpa to announce the king's pardon and invite them here to Uisnach for a great feast." "So shall it be," said Cathbad, and it was done. Fergus arrived at Loch Etive 3 days later with the king's message, and there Nish welcomed him. Fergus spoke of news from Ulster, and nostalgia grew in Nish. He desired to go home more than anything, and he went to Deirdre in a green field high above the glen to tell her the good news. She listened to Nish and was frightened. They talked until a pale wash of light remained in the western sky, though Deirdre knew his resolve and that nothing could change it. In the morning, they walked along the high cliffs over the reef and the hissing waters of the ocean. She tried to persuade Nish from departing. "I had a vision last night. 3 ravens came to us from Uisnach with 3 drops of honey in their beaks and took away with them 3 drops of blood." "What means this dream?" "It means Fergus comes to us with offers of peace as sweet as honey, but the 3 drops of blood are Allen, Arden, and you, my soul. Connachar is a flatterer, and the honey is a trap for death." Despite the vision, Nish decided to return without Deirdre's consent. "We will lay aside our grievance," Nish told Deirdre. "We sail tomorrow morning." Deirdre shed tears through the night and hardly slept. In the morning, they gathered at the shore where Fergus waited with the sailing ship. The air smelled of tar and sunburned barnacles. They set off early, and the mist, intermingled with the sky and the coast of Alba, became blue and then pale blue, until gradually it faded from sight altogether. By midnight, the full moon glowed upon their sails, and the wind tugged at the ropes. Deirdre brought forth her harp and sang a gentle song. The brothers were stilled by its sadness. They each looked upwards while she sang, and their hearts were halved more swiftly than the sword divides an apple. At last they could see the sun rise upon the north hills of Ireland. On shore, Fergus travelled ahead by horse and gave his word to the king. "The sons of Uisnach have come. Let your kindness be shown," he said. "But I am not ready to receive them," said Connachar. "Send them to the Inn of the Red Branch. My house shall be ready tomorrow." Late that night, King Connachar sent a warrior, Gelban Grednach, to the inn where Nish and Deirdre stayed. "Tell me," said the king, "whether Deirdre has kept her beauty. This I must know quickly." Grednach hurried to the inn. Out of breath, he looked in through a slat in the window. So great was Deirdre's beauty that he gasped and gave himself away. Nish looked towards Grednach and seized some dice from a table and hurled them at the window. One struck Grednach in the eye and blinded him. He howled and ran back to the king, who was pacing in his chamber. When Grednach entered, blood streamed from his face. "You have seen her?" asked the king. "I have, and while I was looking, Nish took my eye out." He cringed at the pain. "How does she appear?" demanded the king. "I say the truth. Although my eye has been blinded, were it not for your urgent request, it was my one desire to remain there and gaze upon her for all my days." Connachar flew into a rage and immediately gathered 100 brave men in his great hall. "Go down to the inn at once, kill the strangers and bring Deirdre back to me alive, or you shall all die." The warriors prepared for battle. Unknown to the king, Lavarcham had been hidden in the crowd and ran ahead to warn Nish. "I will put an end to this," said Nish when he heard the news. The brothers prepared for battle in haste. Fully armed, they went forth upon the great plain towards a distant copse and hid themselves in the shadowy tanglewood. During the millennia that men have lived in the world with other men, they have battled one another, but on this night there were none so disadvantaged as the sons of Uisnach. But it is also true that there were none with such noble hearts. Indeed, by measurement of spirit, each brother was the equivalent of 20 warriors. In a rush, the king's warriors appeared at the edge of the plain, and the young heroes went straight into the fray. Their swords shone in the gloom with a gleam of chill flame, so deadly were their betrayed hearts. It was impossible to tell among the clashing swords who challenged whom, and blood soaked the grass until it was a slippery pool. When the fighting had ended, the brothers had laid down the entire 100. Connachar came to the edge of the plain and cried out with wrath, but the sons of Uisnach and Deirdre were travelling across the great plain in the darkness towards the shore, towards Alba, towards home. The king ordered Cathbad the Druid to his side and spoke in forced calmness. "Stop them, or I shall see that you are banished forever." Silently Cathbad went to work. He raised a forest on the plain with dense undergrowth, but the brothers went through it as easily as though it were air. Then the Druid turned the plain into a freezing sea. The brothers stripped their shirts from their backs. Deirdre climbed upon Nish's shoulders, and they swam against the howling current. Their speed did not slow, and the brothers travelled as swiftly as if they had fled on foot. Seeing this, the king frowned, and the Druid feared for his life. He raised his arms, and the sea turned to stone. Rocks as sharp as swords seared upwards and ground together with a great noise, chewing like the monstrous teeth of an enormous granite creature. The brothers ran upon the stones, but slipped and fell many times. Finally Alan, the youngest, cried out in pain, and Nish took him upon his right shoulder, but he soon died. Nish did not let him go, but continued to carry him. He looked around for Arden, but saw in his misery that Arden had also died, and the will to live was torn from him. Wounded and heartbroken, not even the love of Deirdre could sustain Nish, and he slipped between two stones. Lying within the gnashing rocks, he was overcome, and he died without a word. At this instant, the plain returned to grass. "They are gone," said Cathbad. "The sons of Uisnach are dead. They shall trouble you no more." He slipped back into the night. The king went forth to see Deirdre for himself. She knelt over Nish and his brothers in tears. While deep in her sorrow, the king ordered her taken away and locked in his palace. He demanded that the brothers be buried in a grave where they lay. The people did so, and marked the place with a standing stone, carved with the name of Uisnach. The prophecy of Deirdre had come to pass, and she stayed in the household of Connachar. She could not eat, nor sleep, nor cry. After 30 days, a soft blanket of snow fell upon the world outside her window. She sent a foot warrior for her harp. Alone in her locked room, she sang quietly to Nish. She knew she was dying as surely as though it had been ordered by Connachar. She looked upon the vast, empty plain where the battle had been held as she sang.
In skies of frozen snow, where winds of sadness roam, red suns burning low, you were my home, where I would go in green fields. Now unknown, your name upon a standing stone. Love invites one last call, when death from life begins to fall. The streams no longer go to tides of distant seas. Love won't grow old without memories. Your arms my home, where I would sleep. cheers now found. How can I now alone grow old? Dust and stars shed their lights when death from life slips silently to the
In the morning, when the king called for her, Deirdre was dead. The king ordered her buried in the hills where she had been raised. In the night, however, a small band of people in Ulster stole into the night and removed her to a grave on the Great Plain beside the grave of Nish. The people drove a stake of yew wood to mark each grave. Two years later, beside the standing stone grew two beautiful yew trees. Though the trunks emerged from the ground 6 feet apart, the trees had grown together and had twisted around one another. The branches were intertwined so that the two trees were one. All this happened a long time ago in Ireland. The two trees still grow there today.